Hello and welcome to the Regional Pulse. My name is Amandeep. I'm a senior analyst at Confluence Consultants, and today I'm joined by founder of Confluence Consultants, Shraddha Bhandari. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. The region, not so much, unfortunately.
Yes, the region has witnessed a bit of unravelling all at the same time in the past few weeks. For a while, it seemed like we were having a moment of stability. In Syria, at the end of the year, we had a change in government where it looked like cooperation and dialogue were going to be the theme. We also had Lebanon, where President Joseph Aoun was elected after multiple attempts at an electoral race. This one seemed successful. And then, of course, we had the big one in Gaza, where a ceasefire happened between Hamas and Israel. And now this week, or in the past couple of weeks, it seems like everything is disintegrating almost at the same time. So we had the clashes in Syria. We have resumption of violence in Gaza. We've got Yemen, where targeted strikes have led to over 50 casualties, as far as I know. Turkey is another surprising one, where the arrest of the mayor has led to some questions about what the agenda is of the president. So let's try and break all of these events down and see what's actually going to be the sequence of events going forward. So let's start with Palestine. We've had, President Trump's largely controversial idea of displacing the Palestinians from Gaza into Egypt and Jordan. And then we had the Arab League counter-proposal, which was rejected pretty quickly. And now the idea is to move them to Sudan and Somalia. And it seems like these two are not quite stable themselves. So how serious do we think President Trump is about this idea?
So I'll start with saying, Amandeep, that we may begin with Palestine, but everything else is a part of a larger chessboard. So we spoke to an expert, I think in October, November, where he told us that, you wait and see what happens till end November. That's when Trump happened and Syria happened, etc. And then the second one that he told us, wait till March to see how all the pieces come together for quite an explosion. And I think that's what we're seeing. With regard to Palestine, I think the sudden resumption by Israel, I don't think comes as a surprise to a lot of people at all. It's also partly domestically driven because President Netanyahu has to pass his budget by 31st March, otherwise his slim coalition falls. So he's probably an outreach also to the other hardline groups that had left his cabinet when he decided to do the ceasefire. With regard to how serious or non-serious Trump is, I think they're pretty serious about a resolution this time. Right? I think proposals and counter proposals are floating around. A lot of it is pressure tactics. A lot of it is basically telling the Arab states to own the process, to start thinking about how they do it. I mean, moving them to Sudan is, as you said, is a preposterous idea. They're themselves embroiled in a civil war, which today morning, as we read it, seems to be in a decisive moment. And then, of course, Somalia has had its own issues, etc. But the last week was very interesting in the sense that there were a lot of high-level meetings between the leaders here and President Trump. So, Sheikh Tahnoon from the UAE was in US. I'm sure there was much more about than Nvidia chips. Right? President Erdogan had a really long call with Trump, and then the arrest of the mayor and all happened. Qatar was in touch with the US. There was a letter delivered from the US to Iran. So chess pieces are moving, and I have some views on how this is going to pan out, but we'll discuss that.
You mentioned that it seems to be moving in a bit of a decisive direction with Sudan. But even then, there's quite a lot that Sudan would have to figure out, even if, a resolution happens this morning or, this afternoon. Going forward, they would have to think about a lot before they can even be ready to receive Palestinian refugees. So when you say that it's more of a pressure tactic, I agree with that in the sense that, it could just be floating several ideas around until Arab states can come up with something.
Egypt, Jordan is much more plausible than Sudan and Somalia. Somalia, because the Palestinians have something in common with Egypt and Jordan, nothing really with Sudan and Somalia.
All right, so, that's one part of what we're seeing happening in the region. The other part is, of course, Yemen. So it seems like, the three major proxies of Iran, we've spoken about this before in our analyses, that the US and Israel are attempting to dismantle this, this proxy network once and for all. So we've seen that Hezbollah has somewhat been dismantled, and now we're moving into Hamas, and then we've got the Houthis as well. But what I'm curious to understand is, of course, the motive stays the same, that we want to ensure that maritime freedom exists. We want to make sure that no one is targeting Israel. So how come President Trump has decided to go in with much more force than President Biden? And it just seems like, the motive stays the same, the policy would have stayed the same. So what is the difference between the two of them?
So I think I'm going to go back to our controversial webinar that we did in January, the 40s, Trump, tech, trade, and tango. This is the tango part of it. So again, I'm going to say this, and I've said it before, that this is the US empire strikes back. There is definitely a sense that the Middle Eastern conflicts have to reach a point where the axis of evil, which is China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, gets weakened, and also the US has to quickly redeploy forces to the Indo-Pacific. So I think for the Houthis, they had basically indicated that they will start resuming attacks on the Red Sea and Aden and on transport ships, etc. So I think it was partly a reaction to that, full force airstrikes. At the same time, when Israel started its onslaught against Hamas, and Hezbollah is already weakened, and in Syria also, US has moved very fast to broker a peace deal between President Al Sharaa's government and the Kurds and the Druze. So seems that the intent is Pax Americana. The ultimate aim is Iran, to bring the Iranian regime either to the nuclear table or to its knees. I think in the next couple of days, we will see some decisive action if the Iranians do not come to the table in that sense. And I think Hamas especially has lost its bargaining power. They should have accepted the US ceasefire, the extension for 2 months, as Steve Witkoff had said. But for the Houthis also, this is going to be tricky. They've laid this entire narrative about being protectors of the Palestinians, etc. It's very different from Biden because this is unilateral. The US has not consulted the Western Alliance. Europe was not a part of it earlier. It was. Secondly, it's disproportionate. The Houthis have not done anything in the last 2 months to guarantee this sort of airstrikes and the kind of violence that's happened. And thirdly, I think this is directed towards Iran to bring them to the table. Then they'll equally obstinate. So let's see how this pans out.
It's actually funny that you mentioned Iran, because that is where I wanted to move
all
this
roads
conversation.
lead to Iran and the Middle East.
We had the UAE delivering a letter to Iran on behalf of the US, and any pieces that I read about this clearly state that the message in the letter is, we're proposing this dialogue for a nuclear agreement, and if you don't accept it, the alternative is going to be something that is extremely harmful to you. So President Trump has very clearly set the terms that he wants Iran to adopt. And then you, of course, just mentioned that Iran is very obstinate. So how do we see, this kind of, it seems like everything is up in the air. We've got the UAE in one place. We've got Iran, of course, as one of the main actors. We've got Saudi that is emerging as a big diplomatic player. We've got Qatar that has some kind of, diplomatic clout in the region, having been involved in the Hamas negotiations before. So how do we see this, the US either making use of UAE's issues with Iran as a bargaining chip, with the UAE and Iran having disputed islands? Do we see that becoming a player in it? Do we see either the proxies remaining as the key source of negotiation? So how do we see all of this coming together into one narrative?
Well, I guess that's above my pay scale. Really, if I knew that, but just we can make some informed conclusions about how this is going on. I think President Trump is using every leverage that's possible in his kitty to basically force Iran to come to the negotiating table. So yes, you've mentioned the Saudis. Saudis have their own sort of bargaining power. Qatar has bargaining power with the proxies, especially Hamas. Oman has been engaged in informal talks over the years. But what is, the UAE has a lot of leverage with Iran as well. It doesn't get limelighted enough because UAE keeps a low profile. But in terms of just how the business flows and how the commercials flow, UAE has a fair amount of leverage on Iran as well. I think all messages are going in. They're going in via diplomatic channels. They're going in via attacks on the Houthis, on Hamas, on Hezbollah. It is going through the developments in Syria. I also believe that, and again, a controversial point, but I think the Russians will also be offered something in Ukraine to tell them to not come to Iran's aid. How that pans out, we'll have to see. But I think at this moment, every leverage is being deployed to see if Iran can get to the table. And if not, then we'll have to see what the consequences will be for that.
If that is the case, then it makes sense that Saudi Arabia was involved in that conversation
It's all interrelated. The global chessboard is all interrelated.
Yeah. All right, let's move into Turkey. What is happening in Turkey? So, of course, we've seen the arrest of the mayor, we've seen people being detained, we've seen journalists, people from government. We've seen restrictions come through, so no access to social media channels like X, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. It seems like a state of emergency almost has been deployed. To me, it seems almost, for context, we had the prospect of a ceasefire with the PKK and then the call for disarmament. The conversation around that has been fairly vague as far as I can understand it. And then after that, we had the president aiming to make constitutional amendments so that he can run for a third time in 2028. And so now he's obviously trying to, as the dialogue goes, as the narrative goes, blocking the mayor from running for presidential candidate could potentially ensure that he gets a chance to run for a third time. But the way that this event has turned out, to me, it seems kind of self-destructive, because in order to run for a third time, he would either have to call a snap election or he would have to make sure that the constitutional amendment happens. And it doesn't seem like either of those things can happen at the moment. So what is your take on it? What do you think is driving this turn of events?
I think the mayor of Istanbul is a very viable candidate to President Erdogan. He's been very popular. He controls so it's not just about the race to the presidential elections. It's also about the control of the three key municipalities of the cities of Istanbul and Ankara, which is about 35%. I think Istanbul alone is about 35% of the revenue of Turkey. So the opposition controlling it, which is the CHP, is a loss of revenue for the government. So I think it's that angle as well.
Yeah.
Also, the CHP goes in for its primaries next week. I think it's on the 23rd when it was supposed to be, where they will elect Mayor Ekrem. Probably they were going to elect him as the presidential opposition to Erdogan. And so I think a number of things played out. I think Erdogan has a leverage at the moment with the United States, because in Syria, they're very vital to ensure that route is closed, that Iran cannot supply weapons to Hezbollah. They're also playing increasingly key roles in the entire proxy network. So I think he has that leverage, which he thought, the primaries are right here, and I need Istanbul, so let me play that card.
May as well.
Absolutely, but it has led to, as you said, massive protests. So we were talking to our Turkish contacts yesterday. Only WhatsApp messaging is working.
Yeah.
All other social media has been banned. But Israel has been having protests for so many years against Benjamin Netanyahu. Right? He's still there. He's still going strong. With Erdogan also, how many times have we heard that he's out? Right? But he always manages to come back. And if I guess there is a leverage with the United States, then there's no way that the US didn't know that this was going to happen in Turkey. So I think he's playing on all of those leverages while he has it. What is he going to do as a second? Because with Mayor Ekrem, I think the charges are related to terrorism, and also the degree, which means he is going to be disqualified, right? And his successors and all, they'll think 10 times before now challenging Erdogan. So it's a very sort of unstable upheaval in Turkey, and let's see domestically how Erdogan responds to it. But I'm pretty sure he has some tricks up his sleeve.
Well, if you are going to be, in power for so long, of course, you do manage to understand the game.
He's probably now the longest-serving leader of Turkey.
Yeah.
Was Ataturk the one? I mean, anyway, either the first one
pretty
or now.
long. Yes.
Yeah. Same with Netanyahu. He's almost as long as David Ben-Gurion. Scary.
So it turns out that it doesn't matter what variety of events are happening; they all boil down to the same thing. Do you have leverage with the United States?
Absolutely. I think probably, I've said this before, this region does have a will of its own.
Yeah.
It's the events that happen are shaped by the local passions, etc. But in this particular time, I think the superpower rivalries are getting the Americans, the Israelis, and to some extent the Arab powers also on the same side. Major changes happen, as we've said before, when international, regional, and local collide. And I think it's one of those times when local developments in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen are colliding with the regional, which is essentially a quintessential fight between Israel and Iran on one side. That takes the precedent at the moment, but also between Israel, Turkey, Saudi for influence, and then internationally where US is trying to reassert its Pax Americana.
Yeah.
So the three will collide to produce some changes, or at least a very, very virulent sort of a status quo. For Gaza, I hope that, something comes out of this entire mess, some sort of peaceful resolution. to Lebanon, all the best to General Aoun. He's a popular leader. To
Yeah.
see if he can finally get his act together. Syria, I know a lot of factions, but some developments are happening. Let's see if they can get out of their past and get together. And I think at least with Yemen, Houthis still remain a formidable force, probably one of the strongest proxies. And then there's Iran, of course. We don't know what Iran is thinking, and Israel with its claws everywhere. So it's going to be exciting. And then as we sit in the UAE, we're monitoring the developments very, very closely.
Well, lots to unpack here. Thank you so much for the insights, Shraddha.
Thank you for your questions.
And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. And we will be back next week. The region is in flux, as Shraddha says, and we will be back to unpack it. Thank you very much.
Stay tuned to our regional pulse. Thank you.